everyone, it's Neil here from 3D Tutor, back today with another guide. And oh boy, it's been a long one, but packed through with great techniques and info. So what did we do this time? Well, it's been nearly 2 weeks since our last build, and that's because not only did we release a massive Blender course on plants and foliage, but we also decided to create Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark in our own style. We created this complete with rolling boulders, falling floors, trapdoors, poison arrows, and to be honest, once I got started on this one, I simply couldn't stop and had to create the whole thing, which I didn't plan in the beginning. So it's a pretty big scene. Now, would you like to get this one as a free download? Or what about if I told you there was a place where you could get all of our content, that's over 300 hours of courses, absolutely free? Well, here you go. Yep, 3D Tutor, that's us, because we're not big enough to get some big sponsor to come along and support our work. But we do have something better than that, and that is our Patreon, where you'll find every guide we have ever done, complete with all the blend files, materials and textures. Now this is pretty standard across most Patreons, you may see out there, but here at 3D Tutor we want to do something a little bit different. In other words, we want to give you a whole lot more. This is because the more patrons we get, the more free stuff we can keep creating. In fact, if we get to around 150 patrons, we can hire another pro blender or Unreal expert to pump out even more quality content. And of course, free stuff on top of that. So what do we give here at 3D Tutor via our Patreon? Well, over 350 hours of complete courses. Every month, you'll get to choose a course and it will be delivered right to your email. And best of all, you can pick which course you would like out of our vast library of over 23 courses. And the courses aren't just on Blender. We have courses on Unreal Engine, Photoshop, ZBrush, and for sure you're going to find some Substance Painter courses in there as well. So please check us out over on our Patreon, links are down below. So just before we get started on this one, I need your help guys. We decided to create this guide without commentary. Just some nice music, and apart from the texturing part where Luke will guide you through the entire process. So let me know in the comments please down below, I really need your help here, if you would like commentary or just some music or a mix of both. What I'll do when actually this goes live out on YouTube, I'll also put out a survey, so please make sure that you answer the survey and just let us know here whether you want commentary, whether you want music, or whether you want a mixture of both, and that would be really helpful to us. Lastly, my next course is going to be the complete introduction to animations. This is going to be aimed at beginners to mid-level Blender users. You might be even new, completely new to animation. This is going to be aimed at you. And as part of that course, I'll be going in depth on how we actually animated this entire scene. So if you get to the end, you'll see how we animate all the boulders and things like that. That will actually be fully in the course. I'll also be putting in there things like weight painting, shape keys, and even we'll be rigging our own character and doing a quick walk cycle. So if that's something you're interested in, again, let me know in the comments down below, and I look forward to reading them. But enough of all that, what you're here for is to see how we put together Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So let's get started. Cheers everyone.
Hello and welcome everyone to the texturing part of the video, in which we're going to start our journey within Blender, since Neil has done a pretty good job in regards to the modeling, but I had to make sure I check it out myself in regards to how everything is laid out within UV space and what kind of materials are being assigned to different objects and how they're split basically. And also we had to consider in regards to where the vines, for example, are going to be, since that later on can be also applied onto the environment. But of course we're not going to texture that since they are already textured. So by checking the locations of those vines, we're able to determine like where the texturing needs to be done more, or where some of the objects or some of the areas are going to be hidden. But yeah, once I was happy with the overall setup, I just exported everything out onto FBX. And the first thing that I like to do is just basically start by baking the entire thing out on the ambient occlusion. Usually I use a low topology as high topology and just kind of bake it out from the mesh itself. But right now we have high topology already provided. And one thing that we need to consider is how it's going to be split up. And the way it was within the project is basically low topology had basically within a name underscore low poly, whilst high topology had underscore high poly. And when the names were matching, basically we were able to kind of overlay within the program automatically and kind of bake each of the assets separately. That helped us to avoid a lot of common issues in regards to the baking, like bleeding and artifacts and whatnot, since a lot of the pieces were kind of split up based on those naming of the assets. The only downside though is that if it's not named properly, or if it's like misspelled, for example, even if a capital letter is missing in a name, it's going to be not baked out in regards to the topology. So that's why whenever, again, I'm baking it out, the first thing that I do is just bake out a quick check in a low resolution just to make sure that it looks quite all right. And during the baking process, I also got myself a bit of an error. That's because it couldn't find the high topology for the smaller props, because the smaller props didn't actually have high topology. But what I ended up doing basically, after I ended up finishing the baking process for the high topology, I just baked them out in a low topology. But again, while going through this process, I was checking in regards to why I'm having an issue within the centerpiece, what a golden trophy is going to be. And yeah, it was basically because the naming was misspelled. But once I fixed that out, once I exported everything out again in regards to the low topology, I was able to quickly just rebake it and get that fixed. And also realized that there was a bit of a small issue in regards to the normals being inverted. So I quickly went ahead and fixed that up as well. But within Substance Painter, it's actually quite easy to get that sorted, since you can go into the project configuration settings and kind of just switch up the mesh on itself. But once we get everything out sorted in regards to the bake mesh maps, we're now able to move on to actually the texturing process. So the way I started was I actually just got myself material and just wanted to do it from scratch in regards to the stone type of a texture. And the first thing that I like to do is just get myself a very basic type of a material from concrete for the stone, since that is a real nice type of a base color variation, and it just helps us to get a real nice stylized look. Then afterwards, since there is a lot of broken up pieces within that stone, the next step that I wanted to do was just basically add a bit of a height value within that type of a mesh. So I ended up using a simple fill layer that only had height value, and I applied with basic simple type of a mask that was also a triplanar projection to avoid all those UV seams that you'd usually get otherwise. But afterwards, I wanted to just make sure I get some additional color variation. And I was looking at the reference, I realized that it also has some bit of a moss type of a look. And so, yeah, I wanted to get that similar type of a result. I started off by getting myself a base type of a moss look by overlaying multiple type of masks for both height values as well as the base color and roughness values as well. And then that kind of amplified everything. And to make sure that the intensity is not too much, I also lowered it down in regards to its opacity within different channels. As you can see, I'm going between base color, height values, and roughness within this type of a process, just so I could play around with in regards to how the PVR material is being overlaid on top of one another in regards to the fill layers. But yeah, once I was happy with the base type of a look, I wanted to kind of highlight the overall pieces of chunks for the rock in regards to making use out of a curvature map. So I was making sure I do that. I think I applied a curvature map that was actually inverted to get those nice crevices in those areas, which also helped us to get some nicer results in regards to the stone that's underneath the actual rock. And so yeah, I was pretty happy with that. Then afterwards, I went ahead and started the texturing process for the boulder. The boulder is of course placed outside of the map because it's going to be movable, so we need to consider that when texturing, and because of it, we kind of have too many variances in regards to, for example, where moss is placed and whatnot on this boulder. But I wanted to make sure kind of roughen this entire rock up a little bit. So I made use out of a nice noise, and I also added a clamp value to kind of just chisel out the top and make sure that there's not too much variation in regards to how the rock looks like. It still makes it look like it's been worn out and is able to roll basically. And then afterwards, since we basically got ourselves some nice smart material to make use out of, that makes use out of the baked texture maps, so mainly curvature as well as ambient occlusion maps, we're able to reapply those type of materials onto the rest of the mesh. So I was playing around with the floor, trying to get the right type of a color, and I wanted to get a bit more of a brownish result, although in a scene it's more of a dirty type of a foundation, but I still wanted to get that stone look out of this ruins that we're having. So I played around to kind of get a result in between that, and I reapplied the same material from the stone onto the pillars as well. But then I realized that it doesn't quite look as well, although the original movie within Indiana Jones would have a dark gray stone throughout the entire scene. I wanted to kind of split up the overall aesthetics, otherwise it would be looking too similar in that regard. So I ended up looking at a couple of references. I found myself a real nice aesthetic type of a castle from Aztecs, I believe. So I made use out of that and just set myself up with some nicer colors for the walls as well as for the pillars. So basically the main type of materials that we're going to make use out of is going to be materials from the wall as well as the stone, and then the pillars themselves. And of course the floor is going to be something in between, so I made sure that I wear them out a little bit. And as for the pillars that are in the bottomless pit, the ones that are like a character would have to jump over, I made sure to kind of wear out the top section as well to make it look a little bit smoother. Otherwise the noise can be a little bit overwhelming and just take off a lot of the detail from out of them. So later on, to move on, I started up the texturing process for the main trophy room. I got myself the same material that I used before, and I just wanted to make sure I adjust some pieces in regards to how the detail is being placed out, because again, we're using so much of the height information. We got to make sure that we get back that height topology detail that we had previously set up. So I also usually overlay curvature masks as well, just to kind of get that extra detail back out onto our meshes, and that turns out quite well. And during the texturing process for the trophy monkey skull itself, I realized that it wasn't quite working quite as well. So I was trying to figure out what is going on. I was at first thinking that it was due to the bakes, but it turns out it wasn't the case. The reason being why that was happening was basically the UV score kind of messed up for the smaller props. So I just quickly went back to Blender. I fixed that up right away, and then I kind of re-imported the mesh, and that got me sorted. So it wasn't too bad of a process. Again, Substance Painter, within that program, you're able to quickly go back and forth between meshes and kind of re-import them. And all of the brushes, all of the texturing process, if the mesh is kept within the same area, they're going to be identical in that way, in that regard. So then afterwards, once I was done with the monkey, I went ahead and quickly added a rope to the side of the tree that we have next to that monkey trophy. And I already had a quick type of a texture set up with a nice type of a height value. So I made sure to make use out of that. I just added an extra roughness value in regards to it to make sure it looks nice. And afterwards, to get a nice trunk, I made use out of a material that had a nice type of a trunk look. But the biggest issue when working with tree trunks or just wood in general is to make sure that the overall grain, the overall flow of a texture is being kept nicely and consistent. So what I ended up doing is I just made use out of the same material. I applied it onto a simple paintbrush and I started kind of stamping in the detail to make sure that the grain goes in the right way. But once I was done with that, I realized that for the Dreamcatcher type of a prop at the back, we don't have a skull, so I wanted to make sure I get a nice type of a result. I went into ZBrush real quick and got myself a simple mesh skull out of the internet, and then I simply stamped out a height detail out of that. And I think I also added a quick type of a decoration on top of a skull as well. I'm not sure what it is, but within a reference, that's what it looked like. So I made sure to get that extra detail within it. And then all I had to do is just simply stamp it in as an alpha texture. Get some really nice results. Of course, we have to play around with the values in regards to the height value as well. And that gave us some nicer results. Yeah, moving on, we then had ourselves cobwebs to work with. I got myself a couple of variances, a couple of variations to play around with, but basically I enabled an opacity layer in Substance Painter, which in order to do that, you gotta switch up the type of a shader you're using to make sure you do see that opacity layer, and then you kind of add up a new channel, and then you're able to work with opacity basically. And yeah, it turned out quite alright in regards to the web. Afterwards, I realized that there is not enough detail in regards to how the ruins look like. I wanted to play around more with vegetation, and the ones that we had previously in regards to the alpha masks looked a little bit too generic. So I wanted to make sure, of course, it looks quite nice in regards to the rest of the ruin. I went ahead and just checked out how the references looked like. And the one that I liked was where there is some vegetation coming from certain areas and just going in the corners and whatnot. I actually made use out of the particle brush within Substance Painter. I overlaid it with a noise, and that gave me a really nice result in regards to how the vines and how like that extra foliage looks like. Of course, we're still going to have some vines within the ruins, but just having that wouldn't look quite as nice. So I just made sure I reapply that to every single type of a material that the entire ruin is split apart into. And during this process, I also made sure to kind of stylize the entire environment a little bit. I made use out of the ambient occlusion to kind of darken edges in between where the objects meet, and that just kind of highlighted some of that detail a little bit. Normally, if you're working more on realism, of course, you wouldn't do that, but because we're able to highlight that extra shape for the ruins and to get a more nicer type of a stylized look, of course, we're going to do it in here. So yeah, then we're just going around in regards to the floor. For example, I wanted to make sure we break apart that entire entrance, entire pathway, and I just kind of use that greenery to do that. And when I was doing the final touches, the finish up touches, I realized that there's not enough detail for where the pillars are and whatnot. So I wanted to add something extra to that. And luckily I found a really great type of a rune pack. It has a bunch of different runes, over 800 of them, and it's a real nice type of a way to add more detail onto your environment. I started off by just getting it into my folder, and I quickly sorted it out just to make sure I get all of the Photoshop files. Then all I had to do is just simply import the Aztec symbols in, although the pack has a bunch of other types, and I'm sure that in the future projects I'm going to be using them as well. There are a couple of variations within the pack. There is a PNG file of a just simple stamp, and then there's also a Photoshop file and SVG file, which you can also make use out of. I'm making use out of the Photoshop file because it not only has just a black-white type of a texture alpha, but it also has beveled off edges, which gives us more control over how we want to stamp in the detail. Doing this such a stamping out, if I want to just kind of sharpen up the edges, I make use out of the leveling tool on top of the stamped out detail, which helps me to sharpen up the overall edges. But yeah, after importing them, all you have to do is just set yourself up with a fill layer that has a negative height texture value. And just for good measure, I also ended up overlaying a simple grudge map on top of it of the stamped out alpha maps, just to kind of break off the shape a little bit and kind of fit in better with in regards to the overall rune design. So it makes it look like they're a little bit chipped off. And yeah, because I had so much of the versatility with them, I ended up playing around with them, stamping out in certain areas, and we can also make use out of them in order to kind of project it on certain bits. So for example, right now I'm also making use out of them in combination to cylindrical projection, which allows me to kind of project them around the rounded off areas, and that gives us some real nice type of results. And of course, let's not forget the bit where we have a skull, golden skull. The platform itself doesn't look quite as extravagant, so I ended up just also using the same method in regards to cylindrical projection and added a couple of extra details to that as well, and it turned out pretty nicely. During the process, I'm also making sure that I play around in regards to how the color is being overlaid as well. Usually, if you're working on more realistic stuff, of course, you wouldn't want it to be standing out too much, but because this is more of a stylized piece of work and we got to make sure that it is visible from more of a distance, I made sure to also kind of exaggerate the color a little bit in regards to how dark it is. And I think, yeah, I also made sure to use the runes in regards to stamping out the platform pillars that we have. I made use out of the orthographic view in order to get a real nice kind of a view, top-down view for them. And yeah, that just adds so much more detail in regards to the overall design of the runes. You can do a real nice type of texturing throughout the entire design, but to push your map, to push your environment just a bit further, you need those kind of smaller details for sure. And yeah, the links to the runes can be found down in the description below. Make sure to check it out, as it is such a useful type of a pack if you want to do like Aztecs, if you want to do like Dungeons and Dragons type of a fantasy more theme, or like just medieval type, or maybe something Eastern culture orientated. Anything can be found within that pack. It has such a versatility and I absolutely loved it, using it within this Indiana Jones type of an environment. But yeah, anyway, once we were done with that, all I had to do is just add a couple of finishing touches. I made sure to actually add a bit of more of a versatility in regards to the webs and the rope as well. And I think, yeah, I also changed the wood in regards to one of the pieces when texturing, since I reckon that gave off more of an ancient type of a look within this type of a scene. So yeah, once we were done with that, all we had to do is just export it all out within 4K resolution. And since it is a substance painter, it's going to upscale all of that detail, including those smaller ornaments that we did previously.